More about the situation then with Douglas Herbert. He's our foreign affairs commentator, and he's on the line now. Doug, Israel not taking responsibility here, but neither is Netanyahu doing anything to refute the accusations that his government was responsible.
No, you're absolutely right. Listen, you just heard what Benjamin Netanyahu said in those comments. It seems that Israel is doing absolutely everything possible to essentially confirm that it is behind this attack on Natanz without explicitly saying and confirming it is behind the attack on Natanz. Look, in the Israeli media, there has been no censorship, no blackout on coverage of this incident. In the past, such incidents, there's often been some sort of a partial blackout or partial censorship of the coverage. Israeli public radio itself, and this is sort of unusual, went out of its way to say that perhaps Mossad, the Israeli intelligence agency, played a critical role in this operation. This is Israeli public radio saying it. And Benjamin Netanyahu yesterday, so before the remarks we just heard, basically was saying things to the effect that the struggle against both Iran and its proxies, and as he put it, Iran's armament efforts, is a huge challenge. And he said that the situation as it is today will not be the situation tomorrow. I mean, you don't have to really read too much between the lines to try to figure out who's behind this. Israel is really telegraphing to not just the world, but really to Iran, keep it up and you're going to have more of this. Listen, Natanz itself, Nadia, has been the focal point of a lot of these concerns and worries that Israel has. Israel seeing Iran, obviously, as an existential threat. And you'll remember back last July 2020, there was a big explosion at a centrifuge plant, also at Natanz, caused extensive damage there. And at the time, Iran blamed sabotage. Read between the lines, but they were blaming Israel. Last November, you had the assassination, you might remember, just outside of Iran, of one of its chief military nuclear scientists. Once again, Iran pointing the finger of blame at Israel. So we've seen this back and forth, a blame game. Iran blaming Israel, Israel blaming Iran for various things, hits airstrikes, strikes against shipping in the Middle East, airstrikes against targets in Syria, proxies of Iran on the ground in Syria, such as Shia militants there, also blamed on Israel. It's never very explicit. Neither side ever squarely claims responsibility. But in this incident, we're seeing about as close as you can get to Israel brazenly stepping up to the plate and saying, sure, this is it, this is us, without saying, sure, this is us.
Yeah, Doug, and this all comes at a pretty delicate moment, doesn't it? Just as Iran and the United States have begun indirect talks to try and revive the 2015 nuclear deal that Donald Trump pulled the United States out of.
Yeah, and those talks, you use the right word, indirect, because the U.S. and Iran are not directly speaking to each other. It's really being carried out on the part of a lot of the European nations in France and Germany and Britain, and they're sort of doing the shuttling back and forth and trying to hammer something out. They're trying to revive this deal. When Donald Trump withdrew from it, he didn't just tear up the treaty saying it's the worst thing ever negotiated. He also restored sanctions and then enhanced them. He stepped them up and made them worse. Part of a campaign of maximum pressure. You can imagine distrust was already high between Iran and the U.S. The supreme leader in Iran already hated or did really strongly dislike the nuclear deal. Donald Trump pulling out and the consequences of the sanctions have not endeared the Iranians to the Americans. So a lot of that trust and goodwill has been lost right now. And a big issue is the sanctions. Iran says there are as many as 1,600 sanctions it wants lifted. The U.S. says, yeah, well, the problem is a lot of those sanctions don't just have to do with a nuclear program. They have to do with things like human rights and Iran's missile program and activities throughout the region. So it's very complicated now. Facts on the ground have grown since that deal was signed in 2015, Nadia, and the talks are getting off to a very rocky start, and it's going to be very difficult to restore that trust. So they really needed this attack. They needed like a hole in the head in order to try to lend some goodwill to those talks. And the critics even see this as clear sabotage by Benjamin Netanyahu against the administration of Joe Biden. That clearly Benjamin Netanyahu, in their view, just does not want this deal to be revived.
Douglas Herbert for us there. Thank you very much indeed.